and we're here to break down the Brian Walsh saga. So, quick recap. Brian Walsh was a wealthy or well to do real estate executive who has been charged with murdering and dismembering his wife. I have not yet had a chance to look at the opening statements of either the prosecution or the defense. So we're going to do this together. I think it's really nice because this is the way a jury actually gets to see it. The jury does not have um, prior knowledge of the case. They just have to jump in and listen to the evidence that's presented at trial. The question is going to be, is it going to be money, sex, or drugs? Those are typically the three biggest causes or motives underlying many, many murders, especially when it comes to the murder of a spouse. So it's going to be interesting to see how the prosecution or whether the prosecution works either of those themes into their opening statements. Last thing to be aware of, this is all taking place in Massachusetts, the great Commonwealth of Massachusetts, home to the same place where Karen Reed was tried and tried twice and acquitted. The same place where police officers testified that they gathered evidence from a crime scene into red Solo cups. The same place where a police officer, Trooper Proctor, sent some really nasty, disgusting, disgraceful text messages with his fellow coworkers regarding his investigation of Karen Reed. So he sent text messages about the very person he was investigating. And we know Trooper Proctor was subsequently placed on administrative leave and is now no longer a member of the Boston Police Department. So, how will the Commonwealth fare in this case? I think there's going to be a huge spotlight now on the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, given how the Karen Reed trial went, but maybe they cleaned up their act. So, what we're going to do is we're going to go through first the opening of the prosecution, and then we are going to go through the defense, and I'll give you my comments in real time, and we'll take it from there. So, without further ado, here we go.
On January 4th, 2023, Teresa Marchese returned to work after New Year's holiday. She works at Tishman Speyer, and she is the
So just quickly, this is on 1.25 speed, in case anyone is wondering. That's why it sounds a little bit faster.
director of human capital management. That is to say that she's the director of human resources. And
So right off the bat, let me try to raise the volume a little bit. I like his cadence. If you remember Adam Lally in the Karen Reed trial, his opening statements was one of the worst I've ever seen. And I'm not saying that simply because of how poorly the prosecution's case went for them. Forgetting about the substance, he spoke in a monotone. He said, Karen Reed on January 4th went to Boston and did this. It just came out in a terrible monotone. Sounded like he was reading from a script. He's making eye contact. This prosecutor, his name is Greg Connor. We'll remember that. We're just being introduced now to the prosecution team. And I like his cadence so far. He's getting right into it, leads off with the date. He's going to tell you the story. But you know what? I'm going to do the speed, a normal speed, actually, so we can hear it. Okay. We're going to go back to normal speed and let's go.
Tishman Speyer is a real estate management company, but it's a global real estate management company. It has buildings all over the world. And this office that Ms. Marchese works in is in Washington, D.C. When she returned to her office in Washington, D.C. that morning, she was alerted that one of her coworkers' husbands to trying to find her coworker.
So he's setting up the story. I like what he's doing. He's giving you the background. He's setting up the story, a nice narrative, keeping your attention.
The coworker was Anna Walsh, and her husband is Brian Walsh. Teresa Marchese knew Anna Walsh because she hired her. She hired her in February 2022 to work at the Washington, D.C. office of Tishman Speyer and to manage some of those buildings in Washington, D.C. She also knew that Anna Walsh commuted from Cohasset to Washington to work at Tishman Speyer, and that her husband, Brian, and her 3 children were still in Cohasset at this time. She also knew where Anna Walsh lived in Washington, D.C. Anna Walsh had bought a townhouse right near where Teresa Marchese lives in Washington. So when she heard that Brian Walsh was looking for Anna, she got concerned.
So the prosecution is setting up the different characters that we're going to see. And one of them is Teresa Marchese. Who is Teresa Marchese? Why is she important? Well, she was a coworker of Anna Walsh, who is the now deceased wife of Brian Walsh. And she was not only a coworker, she knew Anna Walsh very well because she hired Anna Walsh. And not only that, she lived near Anna Walsh in Washington, D.C. So, what the prosecution, I think, is trying to establish here is who is Teresa Marchese and how does she know Anna Walsh? And this is a very close connection. And we'll probably see more later on of Teresa Marchese. She might be a witness. So, it's just telling us, introducing us to the characters.
And she spoke to her boss, Jeff Chuck, and the two of them went into a conference room and called Brian Walsh. Brian was calm, and he said that on January 1st, Anna left their Cohasset home for a work emergency and had to fly back to Washington, D.C.
So, just quickly, the geography. Cohasset is in Massachusetts, and that's where Anna and Brian lived. And then Anna worked in Washington, D.C. She commuted, and she also had another home or residence where she stayed in Washington, D.C. while she was working.
And he hasn't spoken to her since then. This is the longest they've ever gone without speaking. So Teresa Marchese went and drove to Anna Walsh's townhouse. She took another employee with her, and on the way there, she had another conversation with Brian Walsh. Brian was calm, and he gave her the combination to the garage so Miss Marchese could get into the building. Miss Marchese got there. She was able to look in the windows. Nothing was broken. Nothing was out of order. She got into the garage, and she found some cardboard boxes that had yet to be unpacked, some car seats, no car, no Anna Walsh. Now, the door from the garage to the home, that was locked, so she couldn't get inside. So, Miss Marchese called Mr. Walsh back again, and she told him that she was going to loop into this conversation Tishman Speyer's global head of security, who also works in Washington, D.C. His name is Hugh Dunleavy. He's a retired Secret Service agent.
So that's interesting. So they go to Teresa Marchese goes to Anna Walsh's Washington, D.C. home, and no one is there. It does not appear to have any signs of forced entry, but it's just completely empty. So she just doesn't show up for work. Her husband says, I don't know where she is. She said she left on a work emergency. I'm here back in Massachusetts, and I don't know where she is. So now they're introducing another character, Tishman Speyer's head of global security. And he is not only a former head of global security, he's a former Secret Service agent. So I think what they're also trying to do is establish his bona fides. Probably he's going to be an important character as we get further into the trial.
Mr. Walsh, come. Mr. Dunleavy is looped into this conversation on the phone, and Mr. Walsh's demeanor changes. He becomes very upset. Mr. Dunleavy calms him down, asks him a series of questions, and Mr. Walsh repeats. Anna left the home in Cohasset on January 1st to come to Washington, D.C. for a work emergency.
So again, this is the story that Brian Walsh has supposedly told these other witnesses, that Anna Walsh left on January 1st. Now it's January 4th. I have not seen or heard from her since.
Mr. Dunleavy follows up. Have you called the police? What is the local police department in your town? You live in Cohasset. You need to call the police. The call ends. Mr. Dunleavy works with the Washington police and helps facilitate them getting into the home in Washington, D.C., and Anna is not there. He also calls the Cohasset police just before noon on January 4th. And he reports Anna missing. Hugh Dunleavy from Washington, D.C. calls the Cohasset police, and that is the first time Anna Walsh has been reported missing to the police. And it was done just before noon on January 4th, and no one has seen her since January 1st.
So that's also very important. So your wife is going on a work trip, and she says, according to Brian Walsh, I have to go on this work trip on January 1st, New Year's Day. Some kind of work emergency comes up. What's coming up on New Year's Day when you're a real estate executive? She's not a doctor, she's not a police officer, but something is coming up. Okay, let's say that's true. January 1st, January 2nd, January 3rd, January 4th, 4 days if you include January 1st. The husband doesn't report her missing for 4 days. Your wife goes on a work trip and you don't hear from her for 4 days. I mean, I know people that get nervous if they don't hear from their spouse in in a span of 4 hours. I mean, this is not the 1950s when you couldn't call people. We have instant communications. Everybody's talking to each other all the time. WhatsApp, text message, email, voice notes, phone calls, FaceTime. So 4 days and the husband does not report his wife missing. It takes her coworker saying she's not at work, and the head of the global security to call the police and report her missing for the first time on January 4th, 3 days later. The prosecution, obviously where they're going, is saying, this is kind of weird. No one for 3 days has reported her missing.
Over the next few weeks, it'll be the honor of Ms. Cusick, Ms. Yaz, and myself to represent the Commonwealth. And in that time, we will prove the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of the premeditated murder of his wife, Anna Walsh. And we're going to do that by presenting evidence. And evidence will come to you, as Her Honor pointed out, in 2 different forms.
So again, he's pointing out just reframing, what is the crime that he's charged with? Premeditated first-degree murder. And what's our burden? We have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And he says we're going to do all of that.
One is kind of tangible. You'll see photos of the family home in Cohasset at 516 Chief Justice Cushing Highway. You'll see videos from different stores. You'll see Anna Walsh's banking records. You will also see objects, like a Tyvek suit, like a hatchet, like a hacksaw. Now, in addition to those objects, you will hear from witnesses. Witnesses like Teresa Marchese and Hugh Dunleavy, who I just mentioned.
So there you go. As I said, he was mentioning Teresa Marchese and Hugh Dunleavy right from the start because he wants to introduce them to the jury because they're going to be witnesses and probably they're going to be key witnesses for the prosecution. So right off the bat, the prosecution is introducing him to the jury and explaining their connection to the case.
You'll also hear from a group of witnesses that are Anna Walsh's friends and colleagues. They will tell you that Anna was 39 years old in January 2003. She was married to the defendant. She had 3 children. Will tell you that she was a Serbian immigrant, that she came to this country and began working in the hospitality industry by working in hotels in Washington and Massachusetts, and that she transitioned to real estate. She got the opportunity to work for Jem Mutlu, who had his own real estate company. She actually wound up running that company for him. That was until February 2022, where she got what Brian Walshe would refer to as a dream job, where she got to work for Kitchen Spire. And she would make more money than she had ever made before in her career. She had purchased a townhouse in Washington, D.C., and she was expecting to have her family come with. However, Brian and the children had stayed in Massachusetts. And the reason is that Brian had previously pled guilty to a count of fraud in the Boston Federal District Courthouse. But he had.
So this is very interesting. Why did they simply not move from Massachusetts to Washington, D.C.? Because Brian had previously pled guilty to fraud. Now, as I've explained in some of my other videos regarding the Adelson case, when you talk about other bad acts that someone did, can that come into evidence or can it not come into evidence? Now, this is just a prosecution's opening statement, and there may have already been battles about what can come into evidence or what cannot come into evidence at an opening statement, and there's no objection. But I do find it interesting, and again, I have not had an opportunity to closely follow all the pretrial motions that went on. I'm just tuning in now, but the fact is being set in the jury's mind, being planted, that Brian Walshe had a prior conviction. He did something bad. So is the association now going to come into the jury's mind? Oh, Brian Walshe did this one bad act. He must have done this other bad act. Perhaps. But that's why these are very big legal battles often about what kind of prior bad acts can come into evidence. And sometimes it can come in when you say you want to impeach a witness. You want to say this witness is not a credible person because they did this other thing, XYZ. So we'll see how that all plays out about Brian Walsh's prior conviction. But prior convictions is something which is often very, very heavily contested about how much and to what extent, if at all, they can come into evidence.
Hadn't been sentenced yet. Now, he was accused of owing over $400,000 of restitution. At this point in time, Anna was the breadwinner for the family, and she had moved to D.C. She was still commuting back and forth, but looking to have the family join her in D.C. And Brian too. However, when she bought the townhouse, she did this with the aid of a real estate agent by the name of William Fastow. She was introduced to Mr. Fastow from her former boss, Jem Mutlu. Mr. Fastow will testify, and he will tell you that they became friends, and that friendship became romantic. And that carried on into November of 2022, when Anna needed to go visit her mother.
So here's the sex part. And the prosecution did get to it pretty quickly. And just as an aside, I am very impressed so far with this prosecutor, Greg Connor. I think he's a lot better than Adam Lowry. So far, I think good marks for the prosecution. Much better job than Adam Lowry.
Who was sick back in Belgrade, Serbia. Anna flew to Dublin Island the weekend of Thanksgiving, and Mr. Fastow joined her for that weekend. She then flew and visited her sick mother in Serbia, and then would return back to the United States. Mr. Fastow, after Dublin, would go back to Washington, D.C. But Anna missed Thanksgiving with Brian and the children. And then on Christmas Eve that same year, Anna went out to dinner with Mr. Fastow. They went out to dinner in Annapolis with another couple. And she stayed the night. And she was supposed to get a flight out on Christmas Day. But she couldn't get a flight. So she had to drive up from Washington, D.C. to Cohasset. And she missed Christmas Eve and most of Christmas Day with Brian. She would fly back to Washington, D.C. And on December 29th, she would go to dinner with one of her friends who will testify before you. And that friend will say that she was uncharacteristically tired and emotional. You'll also hear from a series of witnesses that dealt with Anna Walshe right before New Year's. She returned back to Cohasset on December 30th, and she was going to stay with the family until January 3rd. You'll hear how she went to a bar class, B-A-R-R-E. It's an intensive ballet class. You'll hear from the instructor who will say that she did exceedingly well in that class. A person who was with her in a nail salon will testify. She got her nails done on New Year's Eve. And Mr. Mutlu will testify. He went over to the Walshe family residence on New Year's Eve for dinner. 3 adults were there. It was Mr. Mutlu, Brian, and Anna. He got there around 8:30. He brought some snacks for the kids. Actually got to play with the oldest child. And he spent the night talking to his friends. He'd characterize them as jovial. They shared champagne. They weren't drunk. They were enjoying the new year. They actually signed the champagne box. And you'll see that, where they were looking forward to the new year. Brian cooks. Brian.
So where I think he's going with this is he's saying, we're going to hear testimony that Anna went to a ballet class and did very well at the ballet class, right on New Year's Eve. She had her nails done New Year's Eve. She had some friends over for a New Year's party. They had a good time. I think this is to potentially negate a suicide defense. If the defense says that Anna committed suicide, the prosecution is saying, does this really sound like somebody who is going to take their own life? No. It sounds like somebody who was full of life and excited and enjoying the holiday season. And any notion that she took her own life is absurd.
Brian was attentive. Brian also said to Mr. Mutlu that night that he had lost his phone, had been misplaced, but he had felt free as a result of it. Mr. Mutlu left that home on New Year's Day at 1:30 a.m. And there was no mention of a work emergency in Washington, D.C. that would require Anna to fly out or leave the family home at 6 or 7 a.m. that day.
Right. So there again, he's saying, connecting the dots. The friend was there at the party, and there was no mention that there was some work emergency that suddenly came up between 1 a.m. and 6 and 7 a.m. Also curious to see if the defense is going to say whether or not Brian is going to claim any specific details that Anna may have said to him about this supposed work emergency, or is Brian just going to say, oh, I have no idea what this work emergency is. She just told me she has a work emergency, which again, if I were an investigator, I'd be saying, well, on New Year's Day, your wife suddenly has a work emergency that she has to fly out from Massachusetts to Washington, D.C. You're not even a little bit curious about what the supposed work emergency is. And she's a real estate executive. She's not a doctor. She's not a law enforcement officer. Is this common that she has these crazy work emergencies that might come up on a holiday, on New Year's Day?
Now, on January 4th, after Hugh Dunleavy had called the Cohasset Police Department, the Cohasset Police Department dispatched Officer Greg Lawrence to go speak to Mr. Walsh at his home. Officer Lawrence went. He was met outside by Brian Walsh. Brian Walsh informed Officer Lawrence that Anna had left on January 1st, had taken a Uber or Lyft to Logan Airport to fly out to Washington, D.C. for a work emergency. Gave her a phone number for Anna Walsh, described her as 5'2", that she was 39 years old, approximately 115 pounds. He hadn't heard her. Officer Lawrence went back to the Cohasset Police Department, worked with other Cohasset police officers, trying to find any connection to Uber or Lyft or local taxi cabs. Cohasset police would then begin the process of pinging Anna's phone. You're going to get to see the records from that, but essentially the process involves the cell phone carrier, in this case Verizon, sending a signal out to the phone to try and locate.
So this is going to be also crucial. We saw a lot of this in the Adelson trial too, regarding the pinging of Wendy Adelson's phone and mapping out where she was at in the route she took on the day of Dan Markel's murder, in terms of going down Truscott Drive. And so now he's explaining, what does this all mean to ping a cell phone? Well, Brian Walsh said that Anna left sometime in New Year's Day and she took an Uber or Lyft from their house in Massachusetts to Logan Airport. So they're going to want to try to trace Anna's cell phone records and see if her cell phone records, meaning the pings from the cell phone towers, which would show where the cell phone was at a given point in time, does that match what Brian Walsh claims in terms of whether or not that was the route or that was what Anna Walsh actually did? If it does match and they can corroborate his story, well, obviously that's amazing for Brian Walsh. If they can't, it looks pretty bad for him. Now, would that by itself be enough to convict him of murder? Probably not, but it's pretty damning. But let's see how things go.
And the Verizon records will show that the last time that phone that belonged to Anna Walsh interacted with the network was shortly after 3 a.m. on January 2nd. And when it did so, it was in the area of the Walsh home.
Oh, so that's interesting. So Brian Walsh says, I did not hear from my wife since January 1st. And what the Verizon records are showing is that the pings from the cell phone actually showed on January 2nd, the day after she supposedly left to Washington, D.C., show that she was actually not in Washington, D.C., but she was in the vicinity of the Walsh home. Not looking good for Brian so far.
That same day, Cohasset Police also tasked Detective Schmidt with investigating this case. He and Officer Lawrence would go back to the Walsh family residence at 516 Chief Justice Cushing Highway and interview Brian Walsh. And he recorded it. You'll get to hear the recording. And Brian will talk about how Anna was commuting back and forth from Cohasset to Washington for work, how there were some issues with his federal case, and how Mr. Mutlu had come over for dinner that night on New Year's Eve, and how Anna had to leave between 6 and 7 on January 1st. He also, in that interview, described what Anna was wearing when she left the home. Blue-gray hunter boots, a black jacket, and an Hermes watch. So Sergeant Smith will testify before you, and he will tell you that he worked on this missing person investigation and called in additional resources to help. On the 5th, he had his own department do a search of the woods near the family home. On the 6th, he called in a task force made of several different police departments to do further searching of the woods in and around the Walshe family home. Contacted the state police to use their resources. He also got the opportunity to speak to Mr. Walshe on January 5th, January 7th, and January 8th. And when he did those interviews, he was accompanied by detectives from the state police. And those interviews were recorded. You'll get to hear those interviews. And Mr. Walshe, during those interviews, will explain that he and Anna were happily married. He had no knowledge of any extramarital affair. That Anna had her dream job. That it was taking care of the family. And conversely, he didn't take a salary this year out of his company that was a consulting company. He told the police that he owed over $400,000 in restitution on his federal matter. That this case was causing stress on his marriage. That he might have to go to jail. He said that they were very happy and that the biggest problem was that they were apart. Brian also told the police that Anna's job had caused her to miss Christmas Eve and Christmas Day with the family. And that.
Okay, so just to quickly, I think what the prosecution is doing is they're trying to negate Brian Walsh's own statements. So they don't want to ignore what Brian Walshe said. They want to take it and use it against him. And so Brian Walshe, when he was interviewed by the police, is trying to negate a motive. That why would he want to kill his darling wife who he loves so much? She was having an affair. I had no idea she was having an affair. How would I know such a thing? I thought everything was perfect. Because if he did know she was having an affair, well, there's your motive. So he's trying to negate that part. Now, with the work emergency, he's trying to say, as we said before, well, is this something that would happen to her before that she would suddenly have to leave on a work emergency on a holiday? So Brian Walshe is saying, yes, she's had to miss Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. So this behavior of hers is consistent with things that have happened in the past.
And that Anna traveling to visit her sick mom caused her to miss Thanksgiving with the family. And that he did not want to have an argument with Anna about missing another holiday on January 1st. He had a discussion with her about Christmas Day. He was concerned that by him looking around trying to find her, she embarrassed her. So he tells the police, I didn't want to have an argument. So I understood she was going to come back, and she left for that emergency at work. You'll also have access to financial records that will show that Anna Walshe had approximately $200,000 in accounts at Fidelity, and that there was over $1 million in life insurance in Anna Walshe.
So now prosecution is going to motive number 2, right? Like I said at the beginning, money, sex, drugs. They checked off the sex box, right? She was having an affair. Husband is mad at her, jealous at her because she's having an affair. Okay, motive 1. Motive 2, oh, Anna has money. She has over $200,000 in her bank account, plus over $1 million in life insurance. Well, what would happen if Anna Walshe dies? Now, there's life insurance. Who gets the life insurance? Well, let's see if the prosecution gets into that, but they're setting the stage. Sex, money.
And that Brian Walshe was the beneficiary of those policies.
Oh, there you go. I spoke too soon. Brian Walshe is the beneficiary of those 2 policies.
And in addition to the Cohasset police, the Massachusetts State Police also worked with them. on trying to find him. You're going to hear from two troopers in particular, Trooper Nicholas Marino and Trooper Connor Keith.
Really quickly, Trooper Nicholas Marino and Trooper, I think he said Connor O'Keefe. Neither of them were Trooper Michael Proctor. Thank God for that.
They are digital forensic specialists. They have special training in examining computers, tablets, phones. And in this matter, they had the opportunity to examine a MacBook, iPads, and cell phones that were at the Walshe house. And they will explain that on Christmas Day, when Anna had missed Christmas Eve and was, after spending the evening with Mr. Fastow, and was driving up from Washington, D.C., the cell phone that Brian Walshe was using looked up Mr. Fastow on the internet. And that on December 27th, a MacBook that used the Apple ID for Brian Walshe, between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, researched best strategies to divorce for a man.
Oh, here we go, the forensics. And I never understood why people do this. Nothing is private. If you want privacy, do not do searches from your own computer. 101. Go to the public library, use a library computer. They look at his own search history on his MacBook. Best strategies for man for divorce. So Brian says, oh, we had a very happy marriage and I had no idea she was having an affair. And now he's looking up, how do I divorce her? Well, motive again. He doesn't like her too much.
Best state to divorce for a man, Washington, D.C. divorce laws.
Washington, D.C. divorce laws.
On December 29th, Brian Walsh's cell phone was researching buildings that Anna Walshe managed for Tishman's fire and emergencies she had handled for them in the past. Trooper Guarino will also explain to you the internet history of that MacBook that had Brian Walsh's Apple ID beginning on January 1st. At 4:54 a.m., the MacBook searched best way to dispose of a body.
Oh, I mean, is that game over? I mean, maybe the prosecution should just rest right now. It reminds me of House Long to Die in the Cold in the Karen Reed trial. I mean, Donna Adelson searching on her computer what countries do not have extradition. Nothing you say is private in terms of what is on your computer. It is not private. If you're going to commit a crime, which I'm not saying anyone should, don't do it. But if you are going to do it, if you're going to do anything, there's no privacy. All that stuff is going to be able to be recovered.
And then with the similar websites, more than an hour. At 6:24 a.m., same day, the same device, searched how long for someone to missing to inherit.
Well, at least he said how long and not house long.
How long missing to be dead? Can you throw away body parts?
So now what Brian Walsh's defense is going to be, I can predict, he already pled guilty to mishandling a body. So if I had to guess, the defense will be something along the lines of he found her body, he didn't do it, and he panicked, so he did dismember the body after it was already dead. And that would explain his internet search history on his MacBook. Convincing? Well, I mean, look, let's see what they do. Again, this is just the prosecution. The defense might have a whole other story and maybe it completely contradicts the prosecution. But so far, not looking good for Brian Walshe.
Later on that morning, on January 1st at 9:33 a.m., the MacBook went to search, how long does DNA last? And then an article, is it possible to clean DNA off a knife? 30 minutes later, the MacBook researched disposal of a cell phone. At 10:28 a.m., the MacBook researched, I am the user of my wife's credit card. She is missing. And again, on January 1st, at 11:28 a.m., it searched, best way to dispose of body parts after a murder.
Oh, there it is. So this, if he tries to say, oh, I didn't do it, I just came across the body, well, best ways to dispose of a body part after a murder. Again, the prosecution still has to prove their case. The opening statement by the lawyer is not enough, but I don't know how Brian Walshe is going to overcome this.
Trooper Guarino will explain the numerous websites and searches done by the MacBook in the morning and early afternoon on January 1st, and that these websites were about cleaning blood with ammonia, bleach, and hydrogen peroxide. Websites visited included those as whether it is better to throw away crime scene clothes or wash them. One site was entitled, "You want to get away with murder? Use a special detergent." This type of activity on the MacBook continued into January 2nd, when it looked up, how long does Lowe's keep security footage? How to saw a body. How to dismember a body. Can you be charged with murder without a body? Can you identify a body with broken teeth? The MacBook also visited websites for apartment complexes in Brockton and Chelsea. One in particular, Chatham West in Brockton. Brian Walshe told investigators that his phone, which was an iPhone 13 mini, had been misplaced and not found until the afternoon of January 2nd, 2023. When investigators examined that phone, they learned that it had been connected to a power source. It had been unlocked 4 times by either using the face or the passcode. Investigators will also tell you that the location data from that phone showed that it remained in the Walshe residence until the afternoon of January 2nd, 2023. However, there was another phone in the Walshe residence, an iPhone SE, which belonged to one of the children. When investigators examined the location data from that phone, they found that on...
What do you think Brian Walshe is thinking right now? You know, there was they zoom in on the defendant and his facial expression, pretty emotionless, but you guys tell me, what do you think is going through his head right now?
On January 1st, the phone traveled to a Walgreens in Cohasset, then to a liquor store nearby the defendant's mother's home, an apartment complex in Swampscott, to a CVS in Danvers, to a Lowe's in Danvers, and to a Stop and Shop in Swampscott. You will see the surveillance video from those stores. You'll see the video from Walgreens, where a white man with dark hair using a credit card buys Band-Aids and antibiotics. You'll see on the surveillance video at the CVS in Danvers that a white man with dark hair, now wearing a mask, buys hydrogen peroxide using cash. You'll see the surveillance video from the Stop and Shop in Swampscott, where a white man then goes buys ammonia with cash. And you'll see the surveillance video from the Lowe's in Danvers, where a white man wearing a mask and dark hair buys several items that cost more than $400 using cash, including a Tyvek suit and cutting instruments such as shears, snips, and a hacksaw. The investigators will explain how the cell phone location data from the iPhone SE shows that it went to a Home Goods in the morning of January 2nd, and that Brian's iPhone 13 mini went to a Home Depot in Rockland in the afternoon, January 2nd. You will see the surveillance videos from those stores.
So they went through his search history, and now they're mapping Brian Walsh's own forensic data, showing point by point, where did he go, when was he there, what did surveillance camera show, setting the stage one by one.
You'll see a white man with dark hair at Home Goods.
Yeah, so AA Legal Focus, everyone check out her channel. So she just wrote, didn't Brian already plead guilty to something recently? So yes, Brian Walsh pled guilty to mishandling of a corpse. So what he's going to argue, I think, in the defense is, yeah, maybe I did all these stuff about how to, do this stuff with a dead body, but I didn't do it. I just came across her body later, and so I panicked and I wanted to know what to do with it. So now they're going one step further and showing, no, Brian, you didn't just come across her body. You actually killed her. So yes, Judy, he pled guilty to mishandling of a corpse.
Buying scented candles and area rugs. And you'll see a white man with dark hair at the Home Depot buying more cleaning supplies. 20 pounds of baking soda, mop, buckets, and a hatchet. The investigators will also explain to you that Brian Walsh's cell phone on January 3rd was located near apartment complexes in Brockton. You will see the surveillance videos from some of the apartment complexes, including one of Chatham West. You will see someone going to the dumpster and then leaving. The investigators will also tell you that on January 5th, Brian Walsh's cell phone was in the area of dumpsters and a trash compactor by his mother's apartment complex in Swampscott, and that this was before he was interviewed by Detective Schmidt later that night. On January 9th, the police went to those dumpsters, and they took that trash compactor and that dumpster to a facility in Peabody, where they searched the contents of both. And they found an Hermes watch, blue-gray hunter boots, a black coat, a COVID vaccination card with Anna Walsh's name on it, rugs, a Tyvek suit, a hammer, shears, snips, a hatchet, and a hacksaw. The police will tell you that these items were packaged and brought back to a laboratory, and they were brought there for examination. And how some of these items were examined for DNA. And the DNA was compared to samples they had from Anna and Brian.
And want to venture a guess? Do we have a match?
Scientists from the state DNA lab will identify DNA.
Drum roll. Do we have a match?
Of Brian Walsh and Anna Walsh.
Yep, a match to Brian Walsh and Anna Walsh. How surprising.
On the Tyvek suit. They will explain that Anna Walsh's DNA was found from items in the dumpster, including drugs, the hatchet, and the hacksaw. Jem Mutlu said goodbye to Anna Walsh about 1 o'clock, 1:30 a.m. on New Year's Day. When he left,
I'm not sure what's going on.
she was alive. She was with her husband. No one has seen her since her husband said she left on January 1st. She has not accessed her finances, her email, her phone has made no calls, and no one has found her body. During this case, we asked two things. The first,
So I think what the prosecution is doing here, just to close up, how do we know Anna Walsh is really dead if we don't have a body? So he's saying, okay, there's no body, but she's missing. No phone records, no emails, no financial activity, nothing. Judy's saying that to expand the video so the right side of the screen doesn't show up with all the other video options. 1 second. Let me see what I can do here. Sorry, Judy, I'm new to the live streaming. Let me know if that works.
first is that you keep an open mind. Do not rush to judgment, but instead, see how all the evidence fits together. Pay careful attention to the timing of certain events. And second, use your common sense. Don't leave it home. Bring it with you here as you make your examination of every piece of evidence. And at the end of this trial, we will speak to you one more time. And it is at that time we will ask that you find the defendant guilty of murdering his wife with deliberate premeditation. Thank you.
Okay. So there we go. That was the opening statement of the prosecution. In my opinion, A plus. I thought, especially in comparison with Adam Lowy and the Karen Reed case, night and day. I want it. We're gonna do. I know it's long, but we're gonna get into the defense's opening statement next because I want to see how they respond. But perfect job, in my opinion. He set up the facts. He tied the whole story together. Didn't confuse you with extraneous information. Very concise. Very clear. Didn't get into any kind of extraneous, emotions and saying, "Oh, he just was jealous of her," and he didn't even discuss what the possible motives were. He just said the facts and let the facts speak for themselves. So, in my opinion, you guys tell me what you think. But perfect job, I think. So now let's go to the um, defense. Here is the defense.
Brian Walsh. Lied to him, please. Lied to him on January 4th, lied to him on January 5th, lied to him on January 7th.
Well, that doesn't sound very good. The defense is great defense is, yeah, Brian Walsh was a lie to the police. Well, I think what he's doing first is getting the jury's attention. I think the jury is absolutely locked in now after the prosecution, in my opinion, gave a home run opening statement. So he needs to catch their attention and not just bore them. And he's saying, yeah, no question, Brian Walsh lied to the police. Okay. So what I think he's doing is he's drawing out the sting. They're bad facts, and we cannot hide from bad facts. Acknowledge the bad facts. But does that mean that Brian Walsh murdered his wife?
Brian Walsh went to Lowe's and bought tools. Brian Walsh went to Home Depot and bought tools. Brian Walsh, beginning about 4:54 a.m., began a frantic and tragic search that you'll hear about. You'll hear the evidence of that. You will hear evidence that those searches evolved from how best to dispose of the body to even darker subject matter. As he wrestled with the fact that Anna Walsh was dead.
There you go. That's exactly what I was saying the defense was going to try to play. Yeah. I just found my wife's body and I panicked and I didn't know what to do.
Small business owners across the country.
That evidence that you will hear will be hard to understand, but it is true. On January 1st of 2023, Jim Mutlow left the family home of Brian and Anna Walsh sometime between 1 and 1:30 in the morning. Anna and Brian Walsh continued to celebrate the news. They went upstairs to the bedroom. About an hour later, you'll hear evidence that Mr. Walsh got up, went back downstairs to clean the kitchen. You'll see evidence that he looked at his email. You'll hear evidence that he then returned to the bedroom, intending nothing more than to crawl into bed with Anna Walsh, the woman he loved. When he entered the bedroom and began to get into the bed, he sensed something was wrong. You will hear evidence that it made no sense to him. But he nudged Anna, his wife. She didn't respond. He nudged her again, a little harder. She didn't respond. He nudged her now in a frantic and panic reaction to where she actually rolled off the bed. You'll hear evidence that now he is panicking and he doesn't understand what has happened and what is happening. It didn't make any.
So your wife is unresponsive. So you cut up her body? How about call 911?
He sensed it. It didn't make sense that somebody that he had just been with and enjoyed New Year's Eve into New Year's Day would suddenly be dead. Not him. You will hear evidence in this case of sudden, unexplained death. You will hear evidence that it is rape. You will hear evidence that it happens in young people and old people. You will hear evidence it happens in male and female. You will hear evidence it happens during the day.
So where's the body? Wouldn't you want an autopsy done? Why doesn't he say, you're right, I mishandled the corpse. Here's where I buried all the body parts. Now, I don't know. I guess you can't do an autopsy once the body has been dismembered. Convenient for Brian Walsh. But it doesn't really add up to me. She died suddenly, so he cut up her body. How about call 911?
And during the night that it happens. The trained efforts. You will hear evidence that it can be the result of both mechanical and or electrical problems within the body. You will hear evidence that it might be cardiovascular, pulmonary, neurological, or other reasons. You will hear evidence that it occurs in people who have never manifested a symptom that something might be wrong. And in fact, you will hear evidence that sometimes the first manifestation that something is or was wrong with someone is the sudden, unexplained. That's the evidence you will hear from this. Sudden, unexplained death is known within the medical community and the forensic community. But it is to this day not well understood, and that is the evidence you will hear. And it is not well known to non-medical professionals. You will hear evidence. Brian Walsh never imagined somebody suddenly die. 1 hour he's with her, he cleans the kitchen, he comes back up, and she is dead. You will hear evidence in this case that Brian Walsh and Anna Walsh loved each other. Yes, there was stress in the marriage, stress born out of a simple problem that took its toll. And that's the pending federal case that had begun in 2018 and was still going forward. And what happened was, over time, Anna Walsh got a job in DC with the support of Brian Walsh. It was a huge stepping stone in her career. It paid twice the salary. And they talked about it. You will hear evidence that they had to make a decision. Brian could not leave Cohasset because of the pending federal case. So who would take care of the children? Well, Anna worked in DC. Brian did. And he did. There was stress in commuting back and forth between DC and Cohasset.
I use PayPal to buy this ticket. I'm paying it off over time. No fees, no interest.
You know what else has no interest?
Brian Walsh experienced that stress too. And Anna Walsh and him they talked about it on Christmas Day of 2022. And that's what the evidence will be. Yes, there was an affair. You will.
Now, to be fair, I think this defense attorney is doing the best he can with the facts that are present. I like his way of grabbing the jurors' attention, admitting that Brian Walsh lied, drawing out the bad facts, and acknowledging the bad facts and saying, having said all that, it does not mean he killed his wife. He's also very clear about setting the stage. Where are we going to go? What's our defense? What is our theory? Sudden death. She just died suddenly, and he panicked. So I think he's doing a nice job given what he has. I just don't think he has much to work with.
Hear evidence of an affair. An affair does not make someone a bad person, does not make someone a bad mother. Make no mistake about that. But yes, there was an affair, not between Brian Walsh and Anna, but between Anna Walsh and William Kessler. The evidence in this case will be that Anna Walsh did everything she could to hide that affair. That she did not tell her closest friends, her confidants, some of whom lived in DC, the same person, Alyssa Kirby, that she spent December 29th with, drinking and talking about her life. She hid the affair. William Vasco will tell me that he was unaware of any plans of Anna ever telling.
So what he's trying to do is erase the motive. Brian Walsh had no knowledge of his wife's affair, and believe him that he had no knowledge because not even Anna's best friends, who she was very close with, knew about it. So even her friends didn't know about it, and therefore I didn't know either. So trying to, again, negate the motive.
Brian about the affair. William Vasco will testify that they behaved differently in public in DC to make sure there was no appearance of the affair. William Vasco will testify that Anna Walsh told him she would be devastated if Brian ever learned about the affair. Brian Walsh didn't know about the affair. He did know. Anna Walsh had a crush on William Vasco because she told him. And he did not react in a jealous way. And you will hear evidence that over the close to decade that these two people were in love. And all you have to do is look at the evidence and the photograph you'll see of Anna Walsh. And the evidence will establish she is a beautiful woman. And it was not unusual for her to comment to Brian, I had some man look at me today. I think he liked her. That didn't upset Brian, not over a period of 10 years. And when she told him that she had a crush on William Vasco, the man who had sold them the $1.3 million townhouse in DC, it didn't upset Brian. He trusted her. In fact, you will hear evidence from Alyssa Kirby that Anna Walsh told her, I wish he would be jealous.
Well, maybe what she's saying is my husband doesn't pay enough attention to me. And this also then goes to motive. yeah, I don't really like her too much, so I'm going to kill her. So I'm not sure how well that works in Brian Walsh's favor, but we'll see.
You will hear evidence that there was no financial issues or problems. Anna Walsh had just got that job in the early part of 2022 that paid close to $300,000 a year. They own that townhouse in DC. It was worth over $1 million. They owned whole life insurance policies on their sons in the amount of $1 million each. Whole life that you will hear you can borrow against if you need cash. You will hear evidence that Brian Walsh's mother gifted them money, and actually you'll hear from the landlord of the home that they were living in at the time, that Brian was living in, taking care of the 3 boys while Anna worked in DC, that it was his mother who was paying the rent, because that's what grandmothers do. There was no financial problems here. They owned investment property.
Well, there are no financial problems except for the fact that he owed a $400,000 restitution judgment. Sounds to me like there may have been a financial problem.
In Massachusetts. The evidence in this case is that Brian Walsh loved Anna Walsh. You will hear that she spoke of him in glowing terms to William Fester. That she said, I want people to see the Brian that I know. You will hear how she talked about her relationship with Brian with Alyssa Curtin. And notwithstanding the fact that Anna Walsh was having an affair, she described their relationship as open and honest. He believed their marriage was open and honest because he loved her.
The truth is, not every child gets the chance to go to the movies. In North America alone, more than 20 million.
You will hear how she described Brian as her best friend to her friend Alyssa Curtin. You will also see evidence of text messages that you may use to determine for yourself if there was love between these 2 individuals. The importance about those text messages that you'll see is simply that they're dated. The ones you'll see are dated beginning December 25th of 2022, 7 days before New Year's Day. 12:25, Anna Walsh and Brian Walsh are texting each other, and she is sending him 7 properties, listings, primarily out of Zillow, 7 listings of properties in the greater DC area, Bethesda, Annapolis. They're searching for future investment properties.
Well, I mean, all that means is that maybe Anna still wanted to do investments with Brian. That doesn't mean that Brian was not planning on killing her. So he's maybe going to Anna's intent. That doesn't prove Brian's intent, doesn't prove Brian's state of mind, does not prove that Brian was not trying, does not negate evidence that Brian was not trying to kill her.
You'll see that, and you'll hear evidence that then she comes up to celebrate Christmas with Brian and their 3 beautiful boys. You'll see on 12/27, now that she's back in DC, these text messages between them. And they're talking about one of their properties. And they're talking about the fact that it, in fact, sold. So now they need to figure out what to do with the proceeds. You'll see on 12/28, text exchange between Brian Walsh and Anna Walsh. Now, she's back in DC. She's not feeling well. She's telling Brian, I don't feel well. So I'm going to stay at home and work at home today in DC. And they joke. And on the text, Brian says something like, well, I guess I'll have to get you a plunger.
Hope you had some good popcorn, Judy.
Anna responds, I'll tell you what. I'll buy the plunger. You buy me that Porsche. Why? Because Anna Walsh wanted a Porsche. And what you see on that text exchange, right after she says that, is you'll see postings that he sent to her of the Porsches he'd been shopping for the women he loved. And you'll see in his medical that he was shopping for Porsches because she had asked for one. On 12/29, you'll see a text exchange between them where they're talking about a 3-story brownstone that she had found that maybe they'll buy for an investment. And you'll see the text references to how much it cost, the square footage it's up and below. You'll see text exchange between them where they're talking about possible renovations in the future. They are talking about the future. And this is on 12/29. And then on 12/30, simple text between them about her catching her flight from DC to get to Cohasset for New Year's. She texts him, I've landed. And what you see in those text messages are she begins to send Brian pictures of her playing with the boys now that she's reunited with her 3 beautiful boys again. And then you see 7 pictures sent by Brian Walshe back to Anna, taken of her playing with the boys. And how do they sign off these texts? You'll see them. Brian says, love you. And Anna Walshe says, love you too.
So what the defense is trying to do is study Brian Walsh's behavior in the days leading up to Anna's death and say, well, this doesn't sound like somebody who wants to kill her. It sounds like a normal couple having normal conversations. Maybe, but I don't know how he gets around the forensics on the Brian's laptop. But other than to say, which is what they're going to go with, that she just died suddenly and he panicked and cut up her body.
We've come full circle in this opening, and now we're back to New Year's Eve. Jim Mutlow, the family friend, is invited by Anna to come to the house to celebrate New Year's Eve. You'll hear evidence that he was thrilled. He was thrilled to be with 2 people he'd known for years, but he hadn't seen in some time. He knew their kids, 3 beautiful boys. He'll describe how when he drove up in the driveway, Anna Walshe ran down the driveway in her heels, no coat, on a cold winter day to hug him. And then what happened? They all went into the house. And what was occurring in the house? Brian was cooking New Year's. He was feeding them as they all talked for 4 or 5 hours. And what were they talking about? They were talking about the future. They were talking about investments. Anna Walshe told a story about how Brian had found a ring for her and the whole adventure of finding the ring and buying the ring. She talked about it in glowing terms when she talked about how Brian did that.
I mean, the easiest way to test a nonstick is to cook an egg. Now look, check out that Glide. This is the first nonstick made.
Mr. Mutlow will describe that for the 4 or 5 hours that he was there, he saw no problems between them. That the Brian was happy and Anna was happy. He described the atmosphere as jovial, festive. He described it as loving. As adults do for New Year's Eve, they celebrated with wine and champagne. You will have that box, or at least photographs of that champagne box, where they signed it. And what Anna signed on that box she wrote, let's make 2023 the best one yet. She went on to say, courage, love, perseverance, compassion, joy, and signed it, love. Nothing was more important to both Anna and Brian but those 3 beautiful boys. They had talked about the problem of the federal case. It was stressful. When you heard in the Commonwealth's open the reference to a divorce search, please understand that the other evidence will be that that singular search occurred between conversations between Anna and Brian about the sale of their property. You'll see that that search occurred about 8:30 on 12/27. And why is that important? The evidence will show that the only time Anna Walshe talked about divorce with William Fastow, she talked about it in terms of Brian and I attempting to preserve the family assets. Why is that important? Because yes, there was $400,000 of restitution that was going to come due. And yes, Brian may have had to go to prison for some time.
Okay, so here's what he's saying is about the divorce. Why is this important? He's saying the prosecution is taking it out of context. One conversation about a divorce, or one search on his MacBook about a divorce, because they were just doing asset planning. Brian might have to go to prison. We're going to be buying this investment property. We want to protect it. There might be a divorce. There might not be a divorce. Not because our marriage was on the rocks or because there was an affair, but because we were simply trying to protect our assets because Brian had to pay restitution and we wanted to protect that asset. That's all. Will the jury believe it? Well, let's see how this plays out.
And what did that mean? It meant that there was going to have to be arrangements, not just to pay the money, which wasn't going to be a problem, but the boys had to move up to DC because Brian could no longer take care of them. And there would be all that added expense. And they went so far as to talk to Robin Howe, their nanny, their babysitter, and asked her if she would consider moving up. So there were expenses. So when you talk about preserving the family assets, you have to decide, how is it that I make sure, how is it, as Brian Walshe will tell you, how is it that I make sure that my wife and my 3 sons are financially secure if I have to go to prison for a day?
So Judy asked, why is Brian at risk of going to prison? So just the context, Brian Walshe, separately from this murder case, was convicted of a federal crime. I don't remember what the details were, but some type of financial crime he was already convicted of, and he had to pay a $400,000 restitution judgment, and he was awaiting sentencing on that crime. So that's all coming into evidence now because the prosecution is saying, well, it's part of the motive behind the murder was because he had this big judgment hanging over his head and he was trying to get his wife's life insurance. And also, I think they might be trying to link it to Brian Walshe is just generally a bad guy. He was already convicted of this other crime and he's just generally a bad guy. I think on that track, the prosecution will have a more difficult time getting that into evidence if they're just using it to say he was a bad guy. But in terms of establishing a motive, that seems to be front and center. So the defense is saying it happened, nothing we can do about it. It's in the past, can't dispute it. This whole thing about divorce is just kind of asset planning.
For a week, for a month. That's what they were talking about. And in all of the other digital data that the Commonwealth has been poring over for 2 years, you will not hear evidence of any other conversations about divorce. And you won't hear it from William Vasco. In fact, William Vasco will tell you he had resigned himself to think Anna Walshe was never going to be Brian, father of their children. Jim Mutlow left around 1:30. Brian Walshe and Anna Walshe went upstairs. He went back down to the kitchen about an hour later to clean it up. And then the impossible, the unimaginable. It didn't make sense to Brian Walshe. It was confusing. He never thought anybody would believe that Anna Walshe was alive 1 minute and dead the next. And all he could think about were those 3 boys. What would happen to their 3 boys now that Anna is no longer here? What will happen if they think he did something bad to Anna? Where will those 3 boys go? And so, he told the story. He told lies. He tried.
So he's going back to his opening. Right at the outset, he said Brian Walshe lied to the police a number of times. And then he goes through the whole story and now taking us back to the beginning. Why did he lie to the police? Because he wanted to protect his kids. Because if he told the police the truth that his wife just suddenly died, well, they're not going to believe him. They're going to think he did it and they're going to arrest him. And if he goes to jail, his poor kids are not going to have any parents because their mother is dead and now their dad's going to prison. So he lied to the police to protect his kids so that he would not have to go to jail. But nothing to do with him. Completely selfless act on his part. If it was just him and there were no kids, he would never lie to the police. He doesn't care about himself going to jail. It's just the kids. I mean, that's at least what the defense would have you believe. I think we can all take that with a pound of salt.
To hide, so we could hang on to those bullets. Brian Walshe never killed him. Brian Walshe never thought about killing him. He would never think about that. Brian Walshe is not guilty.
All right, so there we have it. That was the defense's opening statement. Let's get to some of the chats. We have at ES5605, I listened live while I was at work this morning and found this court setting so different than the Florida Adelson case court setting. The defense sits behind the state. Yeah, every court has a different setup, a different way. The courtrooms all look very different. We'll see that a lot. Kate Z. Jetris 2, hi A Legal Focus, nice to see you here. Yes, everyone check out Judy, the YouTube lawyer at A Legal Focus. Great channel. Everyone go to her page and subscribe. So that was, I think I'm all caught up now. That was the prosecution and the defense's opening statement. To be fair to the defense attorney, I think he did the best that he could do given the set of facts that he has. I think it was more of a believable story than the Adelson extortion theory. So unpopular opinion, but I give the defense an A. Judy at A Legal Focus, do you know anything about the lawyers? I don't. This is my first introduction to them. I don't know anything about them. Again, if you weren't here in the beginning, the prosecution I thought was very good. I gave him an A+. I thought he did a very nice job, a lot better than Adam Lowy, of laying out the case, not being overly emotional, not being over hyperbolic, just facts, evidence, and letting the facts and evidence speak for themselves, explaining the story very well. And the defense did a good job too. This is our theory. Like it or not, this is our theory and we're going to stick to it. And all we got to do is give enough reasonable doubt. The standard is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. If you have even a slightest bit of doubt in your mind that maybe she did die suddenly, well, then you have to acquit her. I don't think they can meet that burden so far. Again, this really loving relationship. And so he cuts up her body that, and you want to protect your kids. So shouldn't your kids get a proper funeral? And to this day, the body has still not been found. I think most normal couples, if God forbid there was some kind of health emergency or they found someone unresponsive, I think the first reaction is you probably call 911. You don't just cut up the body. Anyway, that's all we got for now. We went very long. Hope you enjoyed it. We're going to keep covering this case. Stay tuned. We definitely went overtime. Hope everyone enjoyed. Don't forget to